Undercover boss orders a simple breakfast, stops cold when the waitress talks about her second job. In the soft morning light, Peter, the man who had once started his journey with a small street cart, was now the owner of the famous Sunrise restaurant chain. At 40, Peter could have enjoyed the comfort of a high-end office, running everything through neatly prepared reports. And yet, those beautifully crafted numbers couldn't shake off the heavy unease in his heart. Something at Sunrise was quietly drifting off course. Lately, the reports kept arriving, filled with flowery language. Revenue is stable, costs have been optimized, employee morale is strong, but behind those closed doors, Peter had begun to hear unsettling whispers that couldn't be easily ignored. Customers complaining about declining service quality, veteran employees quietly leaving without explanation, and revenue, though carefully polished, slowly slipping away. Standing before a wall filled with awards and certificates, Peter sighed. Had he, while building Sunrise into a mighty force, also let go of the values he once swore never to lose? Without further hesitation, Peter left his executive chair behind, put away the luxurious suits, and pulled on an old, worn jacket, the brim of his cap pulled low. He chose a different name, a regular man among regular people, and quietly walked into Sunrise's most iconic branch, the one that had once been his greatest pride in the early days. No grand announcement, no entourage. This time, Peter came to listen with his own ears, to see with his own eyes, the same eyes that once gleamed by the warmth of the kitchen fire. And silently, he thought to himself, if there's still hope to save the dawn of Sunrise, the journey must start right here. Gentle sunlight streamed through the dusty glass windows, casting speckled patterns of light onto the faded wooden tables that had aged with time. Peter sat quietly in a familiar corner of the restaurant, a place that had witnessed his earliest entrepreneurial days, yet now felt so foreign it stunned him into silence. No one recognized the man in the old jacket and low-brimmed cap as the powerful founder of the Sunrise Empire. A simple breakfast was placed before him, fried eggs and toast, a meal that, in the old days, would have drawn crowds with just its aroma. But today, it was merely a shell of what it had been. Dry, flavorless toast, cold fried eggs known of the familiar, comforting taste remained. A waitress gently set the plate in front of Peter, her smile faint and polite, but lacking life. Dark circles rimmed her tired eyes, and she wore exhaustion like a heavy cloak she could no longer hide. Please enjoy your meal. Her voice was warm but carried no natural ease, as though it had been molded from rigid formality. Peter nodded, silent. As she turned away, he found himself watching her slight figure disappear behind the coffee counter, his heart growing heavier with every step she took out of sight. Just a few minutes later, as she returned to refill his coffee, Peter clearly heard a faint sigh. At the corner of the counter, thinking no one was paying attention, she leaned in and quietly confided to a colleague, I still have to take the night shift at another place tonight. I'm exhausted but can't afford to take a break. The pay here just isn't enough. Peter sat stunned. The coffee cup in his hand trembled slightly, his eyes fixed on the dark brown liquid swirling gently, his heart sinking heavily. The revenue figures, the detailed payroll reports, the welfare statements he reviewed every week all confirmed that Sunrise was running smoothly, that employee benefits were well provided. And yet, in just this brief accidental moment, Peter realized behind all those polished numbers were people exhausted, struggling to survive day by day. It was a harsh awakening, a silent but far more powerful warning than any boardroom meeting he had ever attended. Peter slowly set his coffee cup down, his fingers tracing the cold surface of the table. At that moment, he knew for certain Sunrise's dawn had long since dimmed, and if he didn't do something right now, it would fade away completely in the darkness of forgotten dreams. In the following days, Peter was no longer the CEO sitting behind a leather-clad conference table, absorbed in glossy financial reports. Instead, he wore his old jacket and quietly returned to Sunrise dinner at hours he had never even considered before. Early mornings when the city was still half asleep, at noon under the oppressive heat as sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, and even during the late evenings, when the clinking of spoons and forks echoed wearily through the old kitchen. And in those silent hours, harsh truths slowly revealed themselves. 10 a.m., the dimly lit storage room. Peter stood hidden behind rotting shelves, quietly observing Garethi branch manager accepting a thick envelope from a supplier. Gary's faint, smug smile and the quick, practiced handshake told Peter everything he needed to know. Moments later, boxes of supplies were brought in. Cheap pancake mix with faded labels, watered, down syrup that had lost even its color, reflecting the very ethics Gary had long since sold out. Peter clenched his fists, a bitter and furious emotion rising in his chest. These are the dishes I once took such pride in, the ones that built Sunrise's name, and now they've been reduced to this? Lunchtime rush. The dining hall, packed with customers. From his seat in the corner, Peter watched quietly as each dish was served. The pancakes were dry and crumbly, the raw flour smell overpowering the faintest trace of butter. The once famous omelet was now a pale, runny mess of overthinned eggs, completely stripped of its original flavor and pride. Complaints began to rise. Sunrise has fallen this far. This coffee is more diluted than water. How is anyone supposed to eat this pancake? At the counter, Gary brushed past those complaints with a nonchalant shrug, then quickly disappeared into his office, leaving the staff to face the disappointed and angry looks from customers. 3 p.m., the gloomy back courtyard. Peter stood frozen, witnessing a familiar sight. The same young waitress from the morning petite, wearing a faded apron, was sitting hunched over on the back steps, quietly gnawing on half a stale piece of bread left over from breakfast. She ate in a rush, as if her stomach could no longer bear the weight. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out an old phone, her eyes scanning the cold, harsh notifications. Rent payment unpaid. Power shutoff notice, effective tomorrow. She let out a tired sigh and carefully tucked the phone back into her pocket. Just a moment later, as if she had practiced it 100 times before, she stood up, adjusted her apron, took a deep breath, and walked back into the diner, her face once again glowing with a bright smile, as though no storm had ever passed through her heart. In that moment, Peter knew he hadn't just failed as a leader, he had betrayed the very ideal he built his business upon. Sunrise, where every day begins with hope. But now, that hope had long flickered out beneath the weary glow of neon lights, in cold, lifeless breakfasts, and in dreams suffocated by the endless grind for survival. Peter turned away, his eyes burning. His heart felt unbearably heavy with a haunting question. Have I built an empire, or just a golden cage imprisoning the very people I once promised a brighter tomorrow? He clenched his fists. The true dawn of sunrise had to begin again, right from this very moment. That night, Peter didn't return to his office as usual. Instead, he stopped by the diner once more, as the dim streetlights cast long shadows of fallen leaves along the pavement. Inside, only a few late customers remained, and the staff quietly finished their closing routines. Peter sat in the corner of the restaurant, his eyes deep in thought, quietly observing. The young waitress whom he now knew by name, Lina, carefully gathered the forgotten napkins, straightened each chair with care, even though her hands were trembling from exhaustion. At that moment, Gary stepped out of his office, carrying an expensive leather briefcase, walking away casually, without so much as a glance back. Just before leaving the diner, he turned and snapped at Lina. Make sure everything's done before you leave. Be in early tomorrow. We've got a VIP event, and don't make me remind you about the internal fund again. Understand? Lina only bowed her head slightly, saying nothing. Peter saw her quietly take out her old payroll card, staring at the balance that wasn't even enough for a proper meal. She forced a faint smile, her eyes glimmering with a hopelessness he had never imagined could exist right under the very roof he had built. Peter's steps felt unbearably heavy as he rose from his seat. Before leaving, he glanced into the small kitchen. There, the frying pans he once proudly hung himself now lay coated with dust. The corners of the kitchen were stained with oil that hadn't been cleaned in who knows how long. Peter knew it wasn't just about reform anymore. It was time to start over from the very heart of Sunrise, the place where he had once poured all his pride and youthful ambition. And that night, under the warm glow of his desk lamp, light spilling across a map of sunrise branches scattered across the country, Peter penned the first page of his reform plan, writing in bold letters, "Sunrise reborn, awaken the true dawn." No more empty promises. Tomorrow, everything would begin to change. And this time, he wouldn't just watch from afar. At dawn the next day, as sunlight barely crept through the dust-covered windows, all Sunrise Diner employees were summoned for an emergency meeting. The small meeting room was packed tight, tension thick in the air. Quiet murmurs swirled as everyone speculated anxiously. And then, the doors swung open. Peter Harrison walked in. Gone was the man hiding under a faded baseball cap. Before them now stood the proud founder of Sunrise's stance firm, dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, the silver name tag gleaming on his chest. Peter Harrison, CO, founder, Sunrise Restaurant Group. The entire room fell completely silent. Gary, the branch manager, seemed frozen in place, cold sweat pouring down his pale face, despite the air conditioning blasting at full capacity. Lena stood quietly by the counter, wide-eyed in shock, her heart pounding with confusion and anxiety. Peter stepped onto the stage, his voice deep and steady, each word striking directly into the hearts of those gathered. It's been far too long since I saw sunrise only through numbers and forgot why I started this journey in the first place. But today, I'm here to tell you all the dawn we once promised will no longer be hidden by the shadows of greed and neglect. He signaled to the technical team. The large screen lit up, and one by one, the recorded video clips began to play. Crystal clear for all to see, Gary received a thick envelope from the supplier, his eyes filled with smug satisfaction. Footage showed him brushing off customer complaints, smirking when employees pleaded for extra shifts. An icy audio recording played. Want to keep those good shifts? Play nice. Have you paid up the internal fund yet? And finally, the screen showed Lena in the cold, dim storeroom, her trembling hands clutching a dry piece of bread, her eyes red as she looked at an overdue rent notice, and a silent power cut warning glowing from her phone. A wave of heavy silence swept across the room. Heads hung low. Only deep, weary sighs echoed in the air. Peter turned sharply, his eyes drilling straight into Gary. Gary, do you have anything to say before I sign your immediate termination? Gary stammered. I was only following the company's cost-cutting policies, sir. Peter cut him off, his voice steely as iron. Cutting costs never means trampling on human dignity. You're officially dismissed, effective immediately, and I suggest you prepare for your next meeting with the financial investigation authorities. Turning his gaze toward all the staff present, Peter declared, if any of you have ever been forced to participate in these wrongdoings, step forward now. At sunrise, everyone deserves a second chance, or the option to leave. A few low-level managers quietly stood, bowed their heads, and left the room. As the tension slowly dissipated, Peter stepped toward Lena. He bowed slightly, his voice soft and heartfelt. With everything you've endured, why have you never left this place? Lena's shoulders trembled slightly. Her eyes were red, but there was still a resilient shine within them. She gave a faint smile, her soft voice echoing across the silent hall. Because I still hope that one day, this place will truly feel warm again, like the family breakfast everyone once dreamed of. In that moment, Peter felt a tightness in his chest, as if his heart were gripped by a profound, unspoken emotion. He pulled out a bank card and gently placed it into Lena's hands. There's $50,000 on this card, enough to care for your family and chase the dreams you once left behind. This isn't a gift. It's an investment in your kindness, your dignity, and the resilience you held on to even through the hardest times. Are you ready to keep going, Lena? Lena burst into tears, but this time, they were no longer tears of suffering, they were tears of hope rekindled. Peter turned to face the room, his voice ringing out with unwavering confidence and pride. From today on, Lena officially becomes a trainee of the Sunrise Reborn Management Program. We don't just serve breakfast, we serve dreams, and we will reignite the dawn that Sunrise once promised. Thunderous applause echoed throughout the hall, and in that very moment, Peter knew the dawn of sunrise had truly returned. Before Peter could leave the hall, a hesitant hand rose from the last row of seats. It was David, the young kitchen assistant Peter vaguely remembered seeing in a company report, marked with just 3 words, limited potential. David stood up, his voice trembling but determined. Sir Peter, I would like to say something. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward the small, unassuming young man. David took a deep breath, his voice growing stronger. There was a time I almost left Sunrise, but it was Lena who made me stay. Even with barely enough for herself, she still shared her lunch with me so I wouldn't go hungry. And she told me, tomorrow will be better, as long as you don't lose your kindness. Quiet sobs echoed softly through the hall. Lena quickly wiped the tears streaming down her cheeks, and Peter stood motionless. In his eyes shone a deep, profound emotion of pride, not just in his decision today, but in knowing that even through the darkest times, Sunrise had kept a small, flickering flame alive. Peter inhaled deeply and pulled an old employee badge from his wallet, something he hadn't carried in years. In front of everyone, he solemnly handed it to Lena. Lena, I don't just want you to become a manager. I want you to become a keeper of the flame. Lead the younger ones like David, just as someone once lit that spark of hope for you. Are you ready? Lena could no longer form words. She simply nodded through her tears, her face glowing with a radiant smile. And in that moment, it felt as if the true dawn had bloomed right within her heart. The meeting didn't end with a simple round of applause. From that moment on, an unspoken promise rippled through every person standing in that room. Sunrise will never again leave anyone standing alone in the dark. That morning, Sunrise Diner took on a brand new appearance, not through flashy billboards or extravagant slogans, but in the eyes and genuine smiles of people who had once been crushed by hardship. Now, they stood tall and proud, wearing uniforms imbued with new meaning. Right there in the main hall, Peter Harrison officially announced the Sunrise Reborn reform program before all employees and loyal customers. From today, Sunrise will be a place where every effort is rightfully rewarded. There will be no more shady internal funds, no more long workdays without a living wage. We will rebuild from the ground up, not only through delicious meals, but through the finest values we can offer. And he held up the new reform plan, reading each clause aloud, his words echoing through the hall like a solemn vow. Substantial benefits for all employees, a living wage, healthcare support, scholarships for employees' children, and paid leave deserving of their hard work. Complete transparency in sharing tips and benefits. Every tip left by customers will go directly into the hands of the workers, with no middlemen or hidden deductions. Rebuilding corporate culture with 3 core values as its compass: respect, kindness, integrity. Because a good workplace isn't just where people come to work, it's a place where they find purpose and pride in every moment. When Peter signed the new plan right there on stage, the hall erupted into a thunderous and unending round of applause. In the front row sat Lina, now wearing a smart, elegant blazer, her new name tag gleaming proudly. Lina Collins, Assistant General Manager. Her eyes no longer carried the weariness of the past. Instead, they shone bright with pride and newfound purpose. She stood before the new team of employees, her voice filled with deep emotion but firm and steady. I once thought dreams were distant, things meant only for others. But then I realized I can create a new dawn not just for myself, but for everyone who dares to believe and never gives up. Upstairs, Peter stood silently by the largest window on the top floor, his hands tucked into his pockets, watching every moment unfold below. The restaurant was bustling again. Laughter and lively conversations rang out across the familiar wooden tables. The scent of warm pancakes mingled with freshly brewed coffee, drifting through wide-open windows to greet the morning sunlight. Peter smiled softly, his eyes slowly closing to savor the moment fully. He whispered quietly, whether to himself or to the long-forgotten ambitions of his youth. No one could say, This is the dawn I once dreamed of." At that very moment, something unprecedented happened. Before the applause had even faded, Lina stepped down from the stage. Her gaze swept across the unfamiliar faces of the new employees, those who had just walked through the doors of Sunrise, carrying doubts and unformed hopes. She smiled, and this time, it wasn't the weary, forced smile of days gone by. It was a radiant smile, glowing with light blossoming, like the very dawn Peter had always been searching for. I know many of you are wondering, is this really the start of something good, or just another far-fetched dream? She paused, her eyes shimmering gently under the soft golden lights. Not long ago, I sat right there in that corner, with nothing but a stale piece of bread and unpaid bills. I once believed I was just a small, insignificant person in a world too big to care that all efforts were pointless. But today I stand here, not because I was lucky, but because I never gave up. And most importantly, because there are people like Mr. Peter Harrison willing to listen and make a change. The entire room fell silent. Eyes that once held skepticism now glimmered with belief. A few young people tightened their hands together, their sun-kissed faces brightening as Lina continued. And I want to tell you all, the dawn doesn't arrive through grand gestures. It starts with the smallest acts. A cup of coffee made with care, a genuine, unforced smile, or simply a kindness offered without expecting anything in return. That is the sunrise we will rebuild starting from today. Applause rose again, but this time it wasn't just admiration. It was the sound of hearts being warmed, of hands ready to join together and build a truly brilliant dawn. Peter stood quietly by the window, his hand resting gently against the cool glass. Bathed in the morning sunlight, he saw it all clearly: new employees with youthful faces and eyes sparkling with hope gathering around Lina, listening not only to instructions about their jobs, but also about how to plant the seeds of hope in even the smallest of actions. Outside, the scent of hot pancakes wafted through the air, carried by the cool morning breeze. Laughter echoed from the small tables, mingling with the cheerful chatter of children, the gentle stories of the elderly, and the warm glances exchanged over simple breakfasts. Peter slowly closed his eyes, breathing deeply, his shoulders finally relaxing after years of carrying burdens. In his chest, his heart stirred with a peace he hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime. He whispered softly as if to himself, but also as a lifelong promise to every soul that had ever lost its way in this place. This is the dawn I once dreamed of. Asterisk, you may build a magnificent empire, but if you forget the reason why you started and the value of human beings, all of it is nothing more than a castle built on sand. A truly sustainable business isn't built upon dry numbers. It is built from hearts that have been warmed, dreams that have been rekindled, and people who have become better because of you. Because in the end, success is not measured by profit, but by how many people have found hope again, discovered the light, and found a place they can truly call home. Asterisk,